Okay, have you ever heard of a saint revered by both Christians and in Muslims?
I mean, that's going to be pretty rare, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It really is. And that's exactly who we're diving deep into today. Saint George, the dragon-slaying legend.
Oh, wow.
He's everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, he's inspired countless tales, artwork,
Mhm.
national identities even.
It's remarkable how this seemingly simple story of a hero,
Yeah.
and a dragon, it touches on so much
It does.
history and religion and mythology,
Yeah,
and so much more.
exactly.
And it's a story that's been told and retold for centuries,
Right.
constantly evolving along the way.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating, right?
Absolutely.
Because we've got a treasure trove of sources,
Yeah.
historical accounts, religious texts, artwork.
Uh-huh.
We're going to try to separate the historical George from the mythical one
Right.
and figure out why his story is still so powerful today.
One of the things that I think is so interesting is that even experts can't fully agree on who St. George actually was.
Really?
Like centuries of debate
Wow.
surround his very existence, which just adds to the mystery,
It re-
allure, I think,
It really does.
of his legend.
Okay, so let's start with the earliest accounts that we have.
Okay.
They paint a picture of George as a martyr.
Mm-hmm.
During the Roman Empire's persecution of Christians
Right.
under Emperor Diocletian,
Yep.
that's early 4th century,
Uh-huh.
a time when just following this new religion could cost you your life.
Yeah, and this is where things get interesting.
Okay.
Because descriptions of George's torture in these early accounts
Yeah.
are, well, I mean, almost unbelievably brutal.
Oh.
Like, imagine shoes with iron spikes,
Oh, gosh.
molten lead poured down his throat,
Oh, no.
being brought back to life repeatedly by an angel.
Hold on. Brought back to life
Yeah.
multiple times.
Uh-huh.
That sounds more like a superhero comic
Right.
than a historical account.
You're not wrong to think that. Those graphic and often fantastical descriptions
Right.
definitely help to make the story popular,
Right.
particularly among the common people.
Right.
But at the same time, those elements raised eyebrows
Yeah.
among church scholars
Sure.
who were already concerned about historical accuracy.
So even back then, people were questioning the validity
Right.
of the stories.
Exactly.
Like the ancient version of fake news.
Exactly.
Debates.
Yeah.
But if some of these accounts were so outlandish,
Right.
why did they persist?
That is a great question.
Yeah.
It's possible that these accounts, while embellished,
Mm-hmm.
might be based on a real martyr,
Okay.
perhaps a high-ranking Roman official
Mm-hmm.
who defied Diocletian and met a gruesome end.
Okay. Interesting.
History is often a blend
Yeah.
of fact and embellishment.
It is.
Right. It's
Yeah.
hard to know for sure.
Okay. So we might have this historical figure
Mm-hmm.
facing intense persecution, but where does the dragon fit into all of this?
That's the image everyone pictures with St. George.
That's where things take an interesting turn.
Okay.
The dragon slaying part of the story
Uh-huh.
doesn't appear until centuries after his supposed death,
Really?
sometime around the 7th century.
Wow.
Before that, we find him battling serpents
Mm-hmm.
or creatures with human heads.
Okay.
It seems that the iconic dragon image evolved over time.
Right. So instead of appearing fully formed,
Right.
the dragon was a gradual addition to the story.
Exactly.
Like a movie franchise adding a new villain
That's a fantastic
to
analogy.
keep things interesting.
Yeah.
And this is where I think the influence of Greek mythology becomes apparent.
Absolutely.
Right.
Stories like Perseus and Andromeda
Uh-huh.
with their sea monsters
Yeah.
and heroic rescues
Yeah.
likely influenced early Christian art.
So early Christians were taking inspiration from older stories.
Yeah, definitely.
It's fascinating how these cultural threads weave together.
But how did this Roman soldier turned mythical dragon slayer
Right.
become such a big deal in Western Europe?
That's a story of knights and crusades.
Oh.
And some very influential endorsements.
Okay.
The Normans, those medieval conquerors, were really big on St. George.
Okay.
They even claimed to see visions of him during battle,
Wow.
which some historians actually link to the origin of his red cross
Oh, wow.
on a white background.
Okay.
So this imagery really takes off during the Crusades.
So a former Roman saint got adopted by these new, powerful warriors,
It's true.
like a celebrity endorsement today, but with much higher stakes.
Exactly.
And speaking of endorsements, English kings, particularly Edward I and Edward III,
Right.
were huge proponents of St. George.
They were big fans.
Edward I even uses imagery during his campaigns in Wales,
Yes.
which, already had a dragon as its symbol.
Yeah.
Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
Oh, yeah.
So English monarchs went all in on St. George. But this was around the time of the Protestant Reformation, wasn't it?
It was.
I thought saints weren't very popular with the Protestant crowd.
This is where it gets even more fascinating.
Oh, okay.
Despite skepticism from both Protestants and some Catholic reformers,
Huh.
St. George actually survived the Reformation.
Wow.
Picture Edward VI, Henry VIII's son,
Uh-huh.
mocking the St. George legend
Really?
at a royal feast.
A king mocking a saint?
Yeah,
That's a bold move.
it is.
So even as the religious landscape of Europe was changing dramatically, St. George remained a cultural touchstone.
He did.
Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a curious paradox,
Yeah.
While other English saints had their shrines and relics destroyed,
Right.
St. George's somewhat fictional status
Yeah.
might have actually protected him.
Interesting.
He wasn't as tied to specific places or practices
Right.
that reformers opposed.
So being a bit of a mystery actually helped him survive.
It seems that way.
When other saints were being rejected.
Oh.
That's wild.
It is kind of interesting.
But it wasn't just about avoiding controversy, was it?
No, you're right.
Because he offered this powerful story of courage and faith that resonated with people.
Right.
Even those questioning his historical accuracy,
Yeah.
he became this adaptable figure, right?
Yeah.
Open to interpretation.
Definitely.
During Elizabeth III's reign, writers like Edmund Spencer
Right.
reimagined him as a champion of Protestantism, battling the dragon of Catholicism in his epic poem, The Fairy Queen.
Exactly.
So from Roman soldier
Right?
to knightly crusader to Protestant hero,
Yeah.
St. George's resume is quite impressive.
He's had a busy career.
He seems like the ultimate chameleon,
Yeah.
adapting to fit the needs of the times.
That's a great way to put it.
And this ability to transcend, specific religious
Yeah.
or national context is key to understanding his global appeal.
Absolutely.
And we often forget that his veneration extended far beyond Europe.
Right.
Even prominent Islamic scholars like Al-Tabari retold his story,
They did.
emphasizing his martyrdom and piety.
Right.
Wait, Muslims revered a Christian saint.
They did.
That completely changes the narrative.
It does.
It shows the power of stories to bridge cultural divides.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then if you look at the sheer diversity of places that claim him as a patron saint,
Right.
Georgia, Ethiopia,
Right.
Portugal, Moscow,
It's amazing.
it becomes clear that we're dealing with a truly global figure.
Yeah, he's everywhere.
This is incredible.
Yeah.
We've gone from Roman martyr to a global icon,
Yeah, absolutely.
and we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, we've got a lot more to cover.
To really understand St. George's journey from obscure martyr to dragon-slaying legend,
Right.
we need to unpack the evolution of the dragon itself.
Yeah.
Hold on tight,
Get ready.
because we're about to delve into the world of ancient myths, biblical interpretations,
Right.
and how those shaped Western culture's understanding of good versus evil.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
I think so, too.
But the
Yeah.
the world of dragons is far more complex
Yeah.
and intriguing than you might imagine.
Okay, so let's talk dragons.
Yeah,
They're everywhere in fantasy these days.
they are.
But back in St. George's time, they weren't just mythical creatures.
Right.
They were a source of genuine fear, right?
Absolutely. For people in the ancient world,
Yeah.
dragons embodied chaos, destruction, the forces of evil
Okay.
that threatened their very existence.
Yeah.
They were a powerful symbol of
Yeah.
everything people feared.
It's interesting how creatures we associate with fantasy
Ah,
were once so deeply ingrained in how people viewed the world.
right, right.
So how did this fearsome creature
Yeah.
become so central to St. George's story?
To understand that, we need to look back at how dragons were perceived in earlier cultures, particularly in Greek and Roman mythology.
Ah, so we're talking about like those epic battles with like
Exactly.
multi-headed hydras
Yeah.
and fearsome chimeras like Hercules and Bellerophon
Those are great examples.
taking down those monstrous creatures.
Yeah, and even after the rise of Christianity,
Right.
these stories from Greek mythology continued to influence his understanding of the world.
Interesting.
And it's not a coincidence that many early Christian stories feature saints confronting serpent-like creatures or dragons.
So these ancient myths, even from different belief systems, were shaping the stories of this new faith.
I think that's a great way to put it.
It's like a cultural inheritance, passed down through generations.
Exactly. And remember those early depictions of St. George battling serpents with human heads? Those are visual echoes of these older myths, showing how these traditions persisted and evolved.
Okay, so it's more than just visuals. There's a deeper thematic connection at play.
There is.
Dragons, in many cultures, represent primal forces.
Right, they do. Things like greed, envy, or lust that need to be overcome.
So St. George wasn't just fighting a literal monster.
Exactly.
He was taking on these more abstract internal forces of evil.
Right.
That adds a whole new layer to the story.
It does.
So it makes sense that people would find that relatable, right?
Absolutely.
Fighting their own metaphorical dragons.
Yeah.
But the dragon also has a strong presence in the Bible, doesn't it?
It does.
How did that factor into the story?
So you're right. The dragon appears in the Bible.
Yeah.
Most notably in the book of Revelation as a symbol of Satan.
Right.
And the forces opposing God.
Right.
Early Christians were very familiar with this imagery.
Sure.
And it definitely influenced how they interpreted the dragon in St. George's story.
Okay, so you have this fascinating blend of ancient myths, biblical interpretations, and evolving Christian traditions, all shaping the image of the dragon and its significance in the legend.
Yeah.
It's amazing how one story can draw on so many different sources of inspiration.
Yeah, he really is.
And as Christianity spread, it encountered different cultures, and their beliefs and traditions were woven into the St. George story as well.
Yeah.
This is particularly evident when his legend reaches Western Europe.
Absolutely.
Right. You mentioned earlier the Normans?
Yeah.
Those medieval warrior kings were big fans of St. George.
Yeah, they were.
How did their embrace of him shape his image?
Well, the Normans were a dominant force in medieval Europe, known for their military might and their embrace of chivalry. And their adoption of St. George as a patron saint really transformed them from a more passive figure of faith into an active warrior, embodying courage and martial strength.
So St. George got a medieval makeover.
He did. He got a rebrand.
It's fascinating how each culture puts its own spin on these stories.
It is.
Did this new warrior image of St. George affect how people viewed the dragon as well?
Definitely.
Okay.
As St. George became more closely associated with knighthood and warfare, the dragon took on a more formidable, almost heraldic quality.
Wow, interesting.
It became less about personal struggles and more about grand battles between good and evil. A representation of the enemies that Christendom faced.
I can picture those Norman knights heading into battle.
Yeah.
The St. George slaying the dragon emblazoned on their shield.
Right.
Talk about a motivational image.
Absolutely.
But how did this more martial interpretation of St. George go over with the common people?
Right.
They weren't exactly knights in shining armor.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
While the elites might have focused on the military aspects, for ordinary people, the dragon still represented those everyday fears and struggles. It was a tangible symbol of the things they couldn't control that could disrupt their lives. Famine, disease, natural disasters.
So different strokes for different folks.
Yeah.
The knights saw their battles reflected in the story, while the common people saw their own anxieties and hopes represented in that epic struggle.
Exactly. This multi-layered meaning is part of what makes the story so enduring.
It is.
But there's another aspect that we haven't touched on yet. The role of women in St. George's story.
Oh, right.
Remember that classic image of him rescuing a princess from the dragon?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that a classic damsel in distress scenario?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, but it's actually more complex than that.
Oh, really?
While the princess is often viewed as a passive figure waiting to be saved, if we look closely at the early stories, she plays a much more active role. She is often the one who converts the people, leading them to embrace Christianity.
after St. George defeats the dragon.
So she's not just a prize to be won.
Right.
She's actively involved in spreading the faith and establishing this new order.
Exactly.
That's a much more empowering interpretation.
It is. And this active role for women in spreading Christianity appears in many early Christian stories. And reflects the reality that women were often instrumental in converting their families and communities.
It's amazing how these seemingly simple stories contain such subtle details, reflecting the complexities of history and belief. It makes you want to go back and re-examine all those classic fairy tales with fresh eyes.
That's the beauty of these stories. They offer endless layers of meaning and interpretation.
They do.
And as we move forward in our deep dive, we'll see how St. George's story continues to evolve, reflecting the changing values and beliefs of different cultures and time periods. So we've uncovered the origins of the dragon, explored its symbolism, and even discovered a more empowering role for the princess.
Exactly.
But how did this dragon-slaying saint become so closely associated with England?
That's a tale of royal ambition, national identity, and a healthy dose of good PR. To understand how St. George became England's patron saint, we need to look at the reigns of those medieval powerhouses, the Plantagenet kings, and how they strategically used his imagery to bolster their own authority and forge a sense of Englishness.
Well, that sounds like a story fit for a king.
I think you're going to like this one.
Okay, so we're talking Plantagenet kings, right? Those masters of medieval power and symbolism. How did they manage to use the St. George legend to their advantage?
Well, it all started with Edward I, a king known for his military ambitions and his desire to solidify English power. We talked earlier about him using St. George's imagery during his campaigns in Wales. It was a clever way to pit the English dragon slayer against the Welsh dragon.
So it was like a PR campaign, but with swords and shields.
Exactly.
Instead of catchy slogans, a medieval battle for hearts and minds.
It was all about claiming symbolic dominance.
I see.
But it was really Edward III. The king who established the prestigious Order of the Garter, who solidified St. George's place as England's protector.
Wait, the Order of the Garter. Remind me what that was all about.
The Order of the Garter was, and still is, the highest order of chivalry in England. Edward III created it as a way to recognize and reward those who'd shown exceptional service to the crown. And he made St. George the order's patron saint, further intertwining the saint with ideas of chivalry, valor, and English military might. He really made St. George a central figure in all sorts of courtly rituals and ceremonies.
So St. George went from battlefield mascot to a symbol of national pride.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like those sports teams that rally around their mascots today. Except with a lot more armor.
A little bit more armor.
And a lot less merchandise.
Yeah, much less merchandise back then.
And this link between St. George and Englishness really took off during the 100 Years' War with France. English kings would invoke St. George's name on the battlefield. Rallying their troops with cries of, "God for Harry, England, and St. George."
It's powerful stuff.
It's amazing how a saint, who probably never even set foot in England, became such a potent symbol for English patriotism.
Yeah, I mean, it really shows how stories can shape national identity.
It does, They
have incredible power to unite people.
They really do.
And create a sense of shared purpose, even around a figure who may or may not have actually existed.
But hold on, if the Reformation was all about rejecting saints and their imagery, how did St. George manage to survive that religious upheaval? Especially with Edward VI, even making fun of the dragon-slaying story.
Well, that's what's so fascinating about St. George. He managed to weather the Reformation, partly because his story, with all its mythical elements, was open to interpretation, as we discussed. Elizabeth I and her court embraced a more Protestant interpretation of St. George, casting him as a defender of the true faith against the dragon of Catholic corruption.
So St. George became a Protestant warrior. Like an action hero who always ends up on the right side of history, no matter the conflict.
He's very adaptable.
He is.
That's one of the keys, I think, to his success.
And that semi-fictional status that we talked about actually worked in his favor.
I think so.
Unlike other saints whose shrines and relics were destroyed by reformers, St. George's legend wasn't so tied to specific places or practices.
It's like he was the Teflon saint.
Yeah.
Nothing could stick to him.
Yeah.
And so that adaptability allowed him to remain a symbol of Englishness.
Okay.
Even as the country went through this major religious shift.
Wow, that's incredible.
But his story didn't end there.
It did.
It continued to evolve over time, reflecting the changing social and political landscape of England.
That makes sense.
So it's a story that's still being written.
It is.
I think, in many ways.
Wow, this has been an incredible deep dive.
It has, hasn't it?
We've gone from Roman soldier to a global icon, from dragon slayer to a symbol of LGBTQ plus pride.
Oh, we have.
It's made me realize that history is anything but static.
It's not.
It's alive and constantly changing. And we're always reinterpreting and reshaping it.
You put that perfectly.
So what's the big takeaway for our listeners today?
I think the most important thing to remember is that St. George's story, like all historical narratives, is a tapestry woven from threads of fact, myth, and cultural interpretation.
Well said.
And it's a story that encourages us to question assumptions, explore different perspectives, and have thoughtful conversations about the figures and symbols that shape our world.
I agree. And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought.
Okay.
Who is St. George to you?
Yeah, good question.
Is he a hero, a myth, a symbol of faith, or something else entirely?
It's a question worth pondering.
We encourage you to share your thoughts with us on social media.
Let us know.
And keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Into the enduring legend of St. George.
And don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive.
Yes.
For more fascinating explorations of history, culture, and the stories that make us human.
Great. Until next time.
Keep exploring.
Yeah.
Keep questioning.
Keep questioning.
And keep diving deep.